Amen. Why don't you guys have a seat? Can we give it up for the team tonight? These guys are the real deal. They serve from like 3 o'clock until 10 o'clock sometimes. It is a long day, and I am just so grateful for this team. You guys are the bomb, and I appreciate you deeply. My brain is all over the place tonight. I'm just so excited. I appreciate you guys giving me a chance to share my heart a little bit. Sometimes you just got to have a conversation, and I hope you receive it with the grace, and the humility I hope it came across with. I love you guys, and I believe in you, and that's why I continually call this church to bigger things, to more things, and refuse to ever allow us to settle into kind of a pattern of this is just what we do. You know what I'm saying? So every once in a while you can expect a bit of a conversation to happen. But that said, we are getting into the Word tonight. Last week in the All the Feels series, I've really enjoyed this series. It's been a lot of fun. But next week, we're starting a new series called What Is? I kind of want to highlight it quick because we've designed a series specifically to try and help introduce people to faith in Christianity for the first time. There's a lot of questions like, what is the Bible? What is the gospel? What is church? How is this a church? I don't understand. We're going to go through those questions as a church over the next 4 weeks, starting next week with what is the Bible? Really, what is it? And I'm really excited to get into that. So invite some friends, bring them out. We're going to get into it next week. But this week, All the Feels version 3. We're talking tonight about self-confidence / self-esteem. So before I get into it, can all of you just kind of think back, way back, for some of you, further back than you want to think for others of you, to think like your preteen years, all right? Preteen. Who wishes they could return to their preteen selves? Yeah, that was roughly the response, just shaking heads. Nobody wants to go back to being 11 again. It's awkward. You run into things all the time. Your clothes don't fit. Your neck is too long for your body. Your arms it's just bad news. You know what I'm saying? You're like, So when I just want to be honest with you guys, a little bit of transparency tonight. I was real awkward, really awkward, when I was just a 9, 10, 11-year-old. See, I had moved from South Africa, grew up in South Africa. My family's been there a long time. And moved to Canada, a little awkward South African boy. And I didn't understand that in order to be accepted into Canadian culture, you have to love hockey. And I'm like, I'm not, does it look like I play hockey? For real, I think if I put on skates, I'd still be too short and 100 pounds too light. I'm just not built to play hockey. But I remember I was like, okay, I got to play hockey. We moved in December, and first thing my brother did was give me a face wash with the snow. And I was like, I hate this country. It is cold, and people are cruel, and I'm not okay with this. But I remember I was so desperate to fit in, but I didn't understand. This world was unlike any world. People told me about this thing called being cool. And I was like, I don't understand. This country's already freezing. How could I possibly be cool? This makes no sense. Honestly, that was what was going through my brain. And in order to be cool, you had to like hockey, or at least like baseball. I'm still not a fan of either. I apologize. You can egg my house later. And so what I did was I was so desperate to fit in, I brought a cricket bat to school. And it was confiscated because it was a weapon. And I was like, it's not a weapon, it's a cricket bat. Did you guys... And I remember I was so desperate to fit in, and I'm getting the things I love most confiscated and being told to love other things. So I tried a few years of pond hockey and returned to my bicycle after that. It was bad news. But we're desperate to fit in, right? We're desperate to walk into a room and feel like we're appreciated, like we matter, like we have something of worth to add the world. What I want to do tonight is I want to dive into Paul's letter to the Philippians. Now, Paul, you're like, who's Paul? Paul was a leader in the church. And what he was doing was he was writing letters to help people understand, what does it mean to follow Jesus? You see, Jesus had taught a lot, but he dies. He was raised from the dead. And he ascends to be with the Father. And the church was left going, now what? And so what we do is we look partly at Paul's teachings. We go, Paul was teaching the church and helping them navigate, okay, what does it mean So that's what we've been doing. For the last 4 weeks, we've been going, okay, how is Paul teaching the church to live through all the feels? Talked about physical health, talked about stress last week. Anybody stressed out tonight? No? Awesome. I love you guys. You guys can follow along. I'll preach for 2 hours. That's sweet. Nobody's got anything to do or anywhere to be. It'll be like a lesson in not lying to your pastor. We're getting laughs from the production booth over there. I love it. All right, so you know what? Let's just dive into the word tonight. Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1. I tried to read from here, but the print's too small, so I'm going to read from my notes. If you're there, say, I'm there. It's in the New Testament. Nobody's there yet. I'll give you a few seconds. Let's try that again. If you're there, say, I'm there. Whoa. We got to do some Bible study as a church. All right, well, I'm going to read along. The words are on the screen, and we'll go from there. Here we go. Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 20. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I don't really know which is better. I am torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sakes, it is better that I continue to live. Knowing this, I am convinced that I will remain alive so I can continue to help all of you grow and experience the joy of your faith. And when I come to you again, you will have even more reason to take pride in Christ Jesus because of what he is doing through me. Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Then, whether I come to see you again or only hear about you, I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but that you are going to be saved, even by God himself. For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. We're in this struggle together. You've seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it. And then a moment later, he jumps down and he gives these very specific instructions. We're going to chapter 2, starting in verse 3. He says this: don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. So Paul comes out swinging here with this incredible verse. He says, for I truly expect and hope that I will never be ashamed. For I truly expect and hope that I will never be ashamed. I have a question tonight. When you go home and you wake up tomorrow morning and you're getting ready for your week, and you take a look in the mirror, and you look at yourself, and what's the thought that runs through your head? What's your first thought in the morning when you look at yourself? Other than, man, I need coffee. Is it, I'm awesome. I've got this. I'm the boss. I'm confident, I'm smart, I'm intelligent. I'm going to crush this day. You give yourself a little pep talk, ready to go. I suspect many of you, when you look in the mirror in the morning, if you're awake, and if you're excited for your week or not, you probably would look at yourself and use the word too. I'm too tired. I'm too shy. I'm too insecure. I'm too quiet. I'm too skinny. I'm too poor. So maybe you don't use the word too. Maybe you prefer the word not. I'm not confident. I'm not smart. I'm not intelligent. I'm not going to crush this week. The question is, when you look at yourself in the mirror and you actually ask yourself to evaluate yourself, what do you see? It's question one. And question two is, why do you see what you see? When you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? And why are you seeing what you see? I think those two questions are the two questions I want to challenge you on. So that when you look in the mirror tomorrow morning, you see something different and you understand why you're seeing something different. Paul opens this up and he says, "For I fully expect that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ whether I live or die." See, when Paul looks at himself and he looks at his situation, he's in prison when he writes this letter. When he looks at it, he says, I have confidence that I will never be ashamed. I will never be cut down. I'm never going to be defeated. I will never be ashamed, even if I die. Even if they take my life and execute me, I will not be ashamed. So I got asking the question as I was studying this text, how did Paul arrive at this confidence? Like, how could he arrive at this place where he says, I will never be ashamed? What allowed him to get there? Now, Paul is awesome because sometimes he's really easy to understand and sometimes he's like, I don't have a clue what you're saying, bro. But he gets to chapter 2 and he gives us a recipe. And the recipe goes something like this. I don't know if we have any bakers in the house. I'm married to a baker. It's amazing. Anyway. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out for your own interests. Take an interest in others too. So Paul gives us this recipe, 3 sentences, a series of things. Do this, don't do this. You want confidence? Do this. But what we tend to do is we tend to read Paul out of context. We're like, okay, sweet. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning. In order to feel better about myself, I'm going to make sure I'm not selfish. I'm not trying to impress others. I'm not thinking of others less than me. I'm not. But you see, in order to properly understand Paul, what he's doing is he's giving us a recipe in the context of a broader theology. You can't take this and just try to do it. It's not enough to just try and execute what Paul is challenging us to execute. We actually have to understand the context that he's writing from. So what I'm going to try to do is give you guys this recipe, but help you understand why he says what he says and where it comes from as it relates to the question of who are you when you look in the mirror. So point number 1 tonight. Point number 1. Godly self-esteem is grounded in belonging. Godly self-esteem is grounded in belonging. Now, you could actually say self-esteem is grounded in belonging. But I want to paint a broader picture of a different kind of self-esteem. So when you walked in tonight, when you were coming to church, and you walked in and you came into the room, I imagine most of you were thinking, okay, how do I fit in? How do I blend in? How do I, not look like I'm new if you're new? How do I look like I kind of know what's going on, even if you have no clue what's going on? Okay, the coffee. Going to go for the coffee. Let's go for the coffee. Okay, yeah, I'm making coffee. I make coffee every week, drinking my coffee. Right, I'm going to go find someone to talk crap. No one wants to talk to me. Right, so we walk into a room, and we do this at church or any other place. We walk in, and our immediate thought goes, how can I belong? How can I belong? How can I fit in? How can I make sure people at least tolerate me and I don't embarrass myself? Our self-esteem is often built upon what happens when we walk into a room. What are people thinking? What are people saying? How do I make sure that they think and say the right things and understand me the right way? Out of this context, Paul says this: above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Now, I got thinking about this. When I walk into a room, or when you walk into a room, what we generally tend to do is conduct ourselves, whether we're walking into a room or hanging out with our friends or trying to get a job or trying to do pretty much anything. What we do is we conduct ourselves not according to the question of, are we worthy of what Jesus has called me to? We conduct ourselves according to the question, am I worthy of the praises of these people? When we walk into a room, the question that we usually walk in with is, how can I make sure that these people like me? that they tolerate me. So the question is, how do I construct my life to make sure that people like me, praise me, celebrate me, or at least don't ridicule me? And what we do is we look at a group. So we go, okay, I want to be a part of that group because that group looks like they got it going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to conform my identity, my dress, my words. They all wear hats. I'm going to wear a hat. They all talk in cool speak. I'm going to talk in cool speak or something. I don't know. I'm obviously not that guy. I'm going to shift what I'm doing so that I can belong. See, this is the subtle effect of peer pressure when our self-esteem is grounded on the acceptance of others. When we crave acceptance from others, what we do is we say, how can I live so that I'm worthy of their praise? And we crave it, and we long for it, and we desire it. And you see, the reality is normally for most of us, we're sitting on the outside of a social group trying to get in. We're sitting outside going, how do I get in? And what blows my mind is that this is universal across people groups, social group, ages, demographics, wealth statuses. All of us live in this world where we feel consistently like we're on the outside and we're asking, how do I get on the inside? And as long as we're on the outside, we feel insecure, like we lack confidence, like we don't know who we are and like we're not valuable. But when we're on the inside, man, we feel great. We feel like we belong. We feel like because we've secured the praises of people. The challenge is that if we build our self-esteem based on the acceptance of others, we will start to do anything to become accepted by others, to long for that fit. In fact, sometimes we'll even start to degrade others so that we can fit in. Right? Okay, let me tell you about what Suzanne was doing. I don't think there's any Suzannes in the church. If there is, I love you and I'm sorry. Let me tell you about what Suzanne was doing. You're not going to believe it. It's crazy. And we share a little nugget that makes us feel like we're on the inside, pushing her to the outside. We're conducting ourselves worthy of the praise of others. And what Paul says is no. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Conduct yourselves not so that you receive praise from others, but that you receive praise from Christ. Conduct yourselves in a way not so that you are the center, but so that Jesus is the center. You see, in Paul's world, in order to shift our self-esteem, in order to see self-esteem that is confident and secure, it starts by not seeking praise from others. And this is why in the recipe it says, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others. You see, it's not enough to just say, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others. For Paul, what he's saying is, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others, instead point people to Jesus. You see, the objective of your life isn't so that you can belong in some social group, it's so that you can point people to Jesus. The question is, where do you belong? And that's where the first sentence there comes in. Above all. So point number one, if you want to know anything, if you're like, what should I walk away with tonight? Well, let's ask Paul. Paul, what should we walk away with? Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven. You must live as citizens of heaven. Now you see, Paul in this case was a Roman citizen because of where he was born. He was born in a Roman city. It was a free city. Anyone born in that city was automatically a Roman citizen. And see, he understood that there's a difference between citizenship and a social club. Most of us are building our security, our self-confidence, on whether or not we can belong to a social club. Whether or not we can fit in some sort of circle that says, yes, you're valuable. But what Paul says is no. Your value doesn't come from what you do and other people affirming that you're part of their club. Your value comes because Jesus has declared you a part of the kingdom of heaven. You see, the difference between a social club and a citizenship is that you can be kicked out of a social club. You can't have your citizenship revoked. Citizenship is secure. Social clubs are not. In other words, what Paul is saying is your value your worth, your security is given to you not because of what you have done, but because who Jesus says you are. When you become a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, your identity is no longer grounded in a bunch of people saying, you're awesome, you're great, you're valuable, you're the best. It's grounded in Jesus saying, as the creator of the universe, I value you and I choose you and I treasure you and I cherish you. It's not based on what you do, but it's based on what he says. You see the difference tonight? In the first case, our identity, our esteem is built on who we are, what we do, whether or not we receive praise from others. Paul is saying, no. Live as citizens of heaven, where who you are and your esteem is built and assigned to you by the creator of the universe. Now, it's interesting because what we do in our desire to belong is we start to figure out ways to exclude people. Because we want worth, we have to denigrate somebody else's worth in order to achieve it. And we do this all the time, don't we? We walk into the room and we go, okay, who are the people that I can say are not in so that I can declare myself in? Who can I exclude so that I feel included? Who can I say no to so that I can say yes to myself? See, as long as we yearn for the longing and affirmation from others, living our lives where we long to be included and said, yes, you're awesome, yes, you're the best, we're going to be looking for ways that looking for people around us that we can say no to. Paul says this, he says, be humble. Thinking of others is better than yourselves. Be humble. Thinking of others is better than yourselves. I got thinking about this and I was thinking, you know what? My ability to see value and worth in other people says a lot about the way I value and see worth in myself. Let me say that again. My ability to see value and worth in other people says a lot about the way I see value and worth in myself. And what many of us are doing, and I know I've been guilty of this too, is we want to exclude, we want to say, no, you're not valuable. You're not part of the in crowd. You're not part of what I'm, so that we feel valuable. But Paul says, no. Be humble. Thinking of others is better than yourselves. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. You see, the core message of the gospel is this. Let me lay it out for you real quick. The message of the gospel is that there's nothing that we can do in and of ourselves to save ourselves. None of us are perfect. None of us are without fault. But God in his grace came as the man of Jesus, died on a cross and was raised from the dead. And in doing so, paid the penalty for our sins, forgave us and restored us to relationship with him. In other words, the core message of the gospel is that people who are not perfect and therefore not all that valuable, God declares as forgiven and valuable. The message of the gospel is a message of a God who says, I value my creation and I want relationship with it. So if we're going to conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, that starts with seeing value and worth in people around us where it would be easier to not. If we want to be people that are firm and secure, that starts with seeing value and worth in the people that are around us. And I'm not just talking about people like down the street, maybe, in the rough part of town or something. I'm talking about people in our world. This is most evident in the way we form our social circles and the way we work with people day to day. Can we see value? Can we treat people like they have value? You see, I said godly self-esteem is grounded in belonging. It is grounded in belonging to the kingdom of heaven. If we want to be people that walk in self-esteem, we need to be people that understand that our worth and our value is not about what others tell us it is. It's about what God says about us. So point number one is godly self-esteem begins with belonging to the kingdom of heaven. Point number two is godly self-esteem is grounded in purpose. Godly self-esteem is grounded in purpose. I love it in verse 28. Paul says this. He says, don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. Everybody think of your enemy. You're like, I hope that didn't come to you too quickly. If it did, we'll talk. I'll pray for you. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. If you've got a lot of enemies, you should just pray for them and love them, because that's what Jesus said to do. Do any of you have like a critic? Somebody you're like, man, you just, every time you open your mouth, you have nothing worthwhile to say. I had a guy come up to me once, true story. I think it was like maybe my fourth sermon in my life. He came up to me and he's like, that was a great sermon, Robin, but you completely missed the point. And I was like, sweet, thanks, bro. That's real good. I feel like I can really nail this thing. And I was like, don't be intimidated. So the question I started to ask is, what does it look like if we're not going to be intimidated by our enemies? Paul talks about the people that he's having difficulty with, relational difficulty with. What does it look like to not be intimidated by them? Like, how do we get there? I'm going to back up. Verse 27. Then I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. So I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. Don't be intimidated. So if we want to not be intimidated, how do we get there? We get there by standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith. I said godly self-esteem is grounded in purpose. What I mean by that is when we know what our lives are about, we cease to be defined by the criticism and praise of others. When we know that our lives are about the call of God and what He has commissioned us to, it becomes irrelevant what criticism and praise is or is not coming from other people. In other words, you can't be kicked out of a club you don't want to be a part of. What Paul says is keep your vision on the mission. So in the recipe, what does this kind of match to? Philippians 2 verse 4 says, don't look out for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Don't look out for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. In other words, if you want to start building that confidence, you can start to see how Paul is doing it. He's saying, on one hand, keep your vision, your focus on the mission that God has called you to and what your life is about. And what does that look like? That looks like not only looking out for your own interests. This is a very simple message tonight. This point is profoundly simple. Life is not about you. There you go. Life is not about you. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. If we want to be a church of people that are living secure in the purposes of God, we've got to get our vision and our focus off of ourselves and onto the plans and purposes of God and the needs of the community around us. It's amazing what happens when we shift our focus from ourselves to other people, how our self-esteem starts to grow. I already mentioned that I was a pretty awkward, confused preteen. And it's true, I was a little African boy. It was not working out so good for me. And I ended up in high school. And it was the first day of high school, and I remember I saw this guy who became one of my dear friends. And he used to walk around, this is a true story, I'm not even making this up. He used to walk around the halls like this with his binder. And I would go up and, hey man, what's your name? He would just walk away. I'm like, okay. What are you about? Where are you from? I think I talked to him for an hour without getting a word out of him because he had this binder up to his head. And he would walk around. It was the middle of September, 25 degrees out with snow boots and a winter trench coat on. And I was like, oh boy. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm I know what it's like to not be loved. I remember when I moved to Canada, I was told, move back to Australia. And I was like, I'm not from Australia, people. Get it right. There's a vast ocean of difference, literally, between Australia and South Africa. I've never been to Australia. Anyway, I still have some resentment I need to work through. Maybe I'll go listen to one of my sermons on forgiveness or something. And I was like, I know what it's like to feel rejected, so I just made it my mission to be friends to this guy. And it was amazing. Over the next 3 years, as I started to invest and pour time into him, I finally got his name out of him. Turns out he was incredibly talented, gifted poet, cartoonist. All of a sudden, my insecurity as this awkward immigrant kid that didn't know how to fit in, didn't know who I was, didn't know what I was about, I don't remember it being fixed because I had learned to shift my focus off of myself. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You see, what we do is when we want to build people's confidence as a culture, what we say is you do you. Whatever you're about, you do that and you'll be great. And we throw on some Taylor Swift, we pump ourselves up, we like shake it off. And we're shaking it off and we're like, I'm fine, no critics. Do my thing. I really wish I could sing T Swift. I don't know if there's any T Swift fans. Nobody. All right. Well, I'll have a party in my car on the way home by myself. I got a few nods. They're like, okay, you and I will connect afterwards. Right, and what we do is we're like, I'm going to shake it off, and I'm just going to be me, and I'm just like empowered. What Paul says is, no, actually, rather than just shaking it off, why don't you just turn your focus to the needs and the concerns of those around you. You see, people love to criticize. But when you know what your life is about, the criticism or praise of people ceases to be what defines you. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Meanwhile, in the back of our heads, we're going, how can I receive praise? How can I receive recognition? We walk into church and go, okay, I'm going to do my worship thing tonight. And I just really hope somebody sees me on stage. Or I'm gonna serve, and I really hope people see that I'm serving, I'm doing my thing. Or So on one hand, we're doing the right things, but we're doing it looking for recognition. But in the Jesus kingdom, what we do is we say, how can I serve? We're not even factoring in the equation. C.S. Lewis famously wrote, he said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And it's amazing when we become a church and a people that cease to become defined by the praises or criticism of others, man, that is liberating. I believe in this church there is a potential to quite literally change the world. There are ideas in this church that are not being birthed because some of you are afraid of what people might say. What if I speak out in that idea? What if it fails? What if it doesn't work? And internally we're allowing fear of criticism and what others will say about us to define us. Our self-esteem, even though we have all this creativity and this passion, is actually being killed because we desire praise of people more. Then I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith which is the good news. So fight, church. Fight. Fight for the dreams that God is placing in your heart, knowing that God has called you and commissioned you to great and incredible things. Don't be intimidated by what people would say. But you see, what I'm very careful to do here is I'm not building this up on your character. I'm building this up on the character of Jesus. I'm saying he's the one that's called you. He's the one that's commissioned you. He's the one that says you're valuable. So whether or not you have success or failure, it doesn't matter. Whether you live or whether you die, it doesn't actually matter. Because your worth is intrinsically assigned to you because of who Jesus is and what he says about you. If we get this right, I believe this church is going to change the world. This core identity marker that says who I am is grounded in Jesus and who he says I am. not my critics, not my successes, not my failures, not what group I'm rolling with, not my education, not my job, not my family. Who I am is a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. That's what's going to define me. That's what's going to ground me. And out of that basis, I'm going to dream. I'm going to execute dreams. I'm going to go places. I'm going to try ideas. See, because Paul's confidence is rooted in who Jesus is, there's no success or failure that could take away his intrinsic worth. See, when you know what your life is about, we can start to build godly self-esteem. I want to return as I close here to Paul's opening word. He says, "For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed." For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed. I got thinking about that word ashamed. Another word that you could use there is I fully expect and hope that I'll never be disfigured. I want to return to that question I asked at the beginning. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? What do you see when you stand there tomorrow morning, you're brushing your teeth and you're giving yourself a look in the mirror and you're making faces? What do you see? For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed. The challenge is that many of us, what we see is shame. We see shame because of what we've done. We see shame because we haven't ever been built up. We see shame because we feel like we don't make the grade, we don't fit in, we don't count. It's interesting, when Paul writes this, Paul was a murderer. He had spent his life running around murdering Christians. And yet he says, I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed. When he looks at himself, he doesn't see shame. Now, the thing about this word shame is that in the scriptures, it partly refers to how we feel and how we look when we see ourselves, but it actually refers much more accurately to how we feel and we look when we look at God. When Paul says, I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, what he's saying is, when I look and stand before God, I know that I will never be ashamed. And I think what happens is, many of us, when we stand before God and we look at Him, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see shame. We see frustration, we see inadequacy, we see those words to and not. And then we can't even look at God. We turn our attention to God. We go, God, I can't even look at you. I can't even know you. How can you look at me? I'm inadequate. I'm not enough. And you see, this is actually why this is core gospel stuff tonight. Because what Paul understands is that the reason he can stand and not be ashamed isn't because of the fact that he hasn't murdered people and he's lived a good enough life. The reason he can stand before God and not be ashamed is because he understands that his forgiveness is a product of Jesus, life and death and resurrection. He understands that he can stand before God and not be ashamed because God has looked at him and said, I love you and I treasure you and you are worthy of my love, and I want to know you and I want to be in relationship with you, and you have worth and you are valuable. When we have an encounter with who Jesus is and allow Him and what He says about us to define us, not only are we able to look in the mirror, instead of seeing shame, we can start to see potential. But more importantly, when we look at God, we can, instead of seeing shame and separation, we can actually step into relationship with Him who made us, Him who created us for that relationship. Understanding that we are accepted by Jesus, not because of what we have done, but because of what He has done, doesn't just change our salvation, it changes our very identity, our citizenship, where we belong. So on that note, I want to invite you guys to bow your heads as I wrap up here. If that's you tonight, you're saying, Robin, I've been building my identity around what other people have to say about me. And I want to learn to build my identity around what Jesus has to say about me. If that's you tonight, why don't you raise your hand? Yeah, I see those. All over. Once it's up, you put it down. Tonight you're saying, I've been seeking the praise of others. And I want to learn to walk in the confidence that Jesus has called me to. I want to pray for you tonight. Jesus, I pray that each person in this room, this is not a complex message tonight, it's a simple message. God, that we would find our citizenship in your kingdom and what you declare about us. God, that the people in this church would know that they are loved by you, treasured by you, and that they would walk in that confidence. Not self-confidence, but a confidence given to them by your work on the cross. Finally, before I let you guys go, every week, we give an opportunity for people to respond and say, you know what, I've been hearing about this Jesus person, and I'm starting to understand that I need to give him my life. If that's you, if you've been saying, I've been clinging to my life, and I understand now that I need to release my life and accept Jesus as the Lord of my life. If that's you tonight, why don't you raise your hand? Is there anyone here tonight that says, I want to follow Jesus? If that's you, why don't you raise your hand? And pray with you. If that was you and you raised your hand, why don't you pray along with me tonight? Jesus, I acknowledge that I've been living apart from you. And I thank you that you offer me new life. So Jesus, I ask that you would forgive me. And God, that you would give me new life as I follow you. Thank you, Jesus. I trust you with my life. And from now on, I follow you.